We are just about 15 minutes away from these remarks by Secretary of War Pete Hegseth and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane. We're going to bring those to you in full, commercial free, when those get underway again, coming up in just about 14 minutes here on Live Now from Fox. And as we talk about everything relating to Operation Epic Fury, we continue to talk with the experts. I do want to bring in Andrew Borene, a senior fellow at the National Security Institute at George Mason University Scalia Law School, former senior intelligence official, board member of Special Operations Association of America, and the senior counterterrorism advisor to the Atlantic Council. He wears a lot of hats and is joining us now live to discuss it all. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thanks for having me, Josh. Obviously a lot going on this morning and will continue throughout the week.
Yeah, I was going to say the last 48 hours have been very busy. We're getting kind of information coming in and out here. I wanted to ask you, over the last 48 hours, as all of this has played out, what has stood out to you about what we've seen?
Yeah, I mean, look, there is a lot to comment on. I think since 2003, I don't believe we've seen this level of geopolitical movement, not in the Middle East, and certainly not with regard to anything the United States has been involved in. You know, this is a major constellation shift in terms of how things are going to go for the future of Iran, for the future of the Islamic Republic, for their ability to sponsor worldwide terrorism. And so I think, you know, if I'm amazed at anything, I'm still trying to process as many analysts and even many other former, you know, operational planners, former intelligence professionals, former military. Many of us are trying to take into account just the order of magnitude of these strikes, the volume of the planning that was put into it, and really just how incredibly destructive this has been to the very most senior-most levels of a totalitarian regime that has been causing us all heartburn, pain, and lethal campaigns against Americans for, you know, for certainly all of our adult lives and longer, all the way back to 1979.
And it's interesting here because, again, we're getting bits and pieces. We know that we are just moments away from getting an update that's going to come in from Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, providing a little bit more information about the mission itself. If you could ask him any question or questions, what would you ask of him?
Well, I'd be cautious on that front. I think one of the reasons we've seen success with this operation, success with Midnight Hammer, success with Absolute Resolve in Venezuela is that they aren't talking about it. In terms of military planning, we would call that operational security. And so I think that, you know, I wouldn't ask questions about what comes next too much right at this time. The fundamental, most important thing would be, how do you sustain this force? How do you sustain this level of operational tempo? Which I realize is a little counterintuitive to most of what I'm hearing in the media lately. But we need to protect American lives. We need to minimize casualties to Iranian civilians. That means we need a very concerted long-term effort. This isn't likely to be over in a few days. So I think my questions would be, what are we doing to sustain a victory that can be secured for a transition to a different power in Iran? And I think that that's a very uncomfortable conversation for many Americans and people around the world. But we're starting to see some coalition grow with UAE, Jordan, Saudi, France, UK, and others who recognize that this might be a moment in history where we could, in fact, decapitate the regime in Iran. And yes, it comes with a lot of question marks. So does that make sense to you? What I'm saying? Like, most media wants to dig right in, but I think we need to recognize that we're talking about lives. We're talking about mission success in what has been the biggest deployment of military force since 2003.
And no, that's important to mention there because you don't want to reveal too much. You are talking, of course, about the lives of Americans who are fighting out there. We know, sadly, we've lost 4 U.S. service members, according to CENTCOM. They provided an update here a short time ago. And of course, we did see some folks there at the podium over in the Pentagon. They were just doing a microphone check. That was clearly not Secretary Hegseth and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane. Once we see them walk up, though, we will, of course, pop the audio up and listen in. I wanted to ask you, though, because, again, we are talking about, as it was mentioned several times, quote unquote, cutting off the head of the snake, as you talk about the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, being killed. He was taken out in this strike. Several other Iranian top officials taken out. His, I believe, daughter, son-in-law, a lot of different others who are now gone. What does that say about the fact that the U.S. was able to gather that intelligence and take them out?
So, like I said, I think that what we're observing, this is a great question. And again, it kind of speaks to that operational security and the ability to build an incredibly robust plan in partnership with the Israelis. This did not happen on a whim. This was months in the planning and in the buildup, high value intelligence being gathered, massive data being pulled in through many Starlink terminals. I don't know if you've heard that or some of the folks who are watching right now understand, but Starlink, many thousands of terminals were smuggled into Iran during the protests as this regime was murdering tens of thousands of its own people. Those Starlink terminals broke an internet kind of think of it as a black box. Nobody could see what was happening in Iran. But those Starlink terminals started to create mechanisms for doctors to report casualties, for protesters to show that there still was a viable opposition, we hope. And so I think, the fidelity of the intelligence that has been garnered by revolutionary changes in how kind of unclassified information can be shared in and out of a closed society, this is sea change. And so the precision of these strikes was driven by months and months of preparation. And now, we are in the operations phase. We're in the kinetic phase. And, I think the most important thing is to remember that we must support mission success and preservation of life. First and foremost, our troops and the civilians forward deployed, but second most and critical for a successful regime transfer, if that's where this goes, is we've got to minimize civilian casualties amongst the Iranian population. They've been suffering under the boot of 47 years of domestic terrorism against them by a minority religious sect that has been murdering them. And spreading this terrorist philosophy worldwide through operations and attacks on all Western society. So, they chant death to Israel, they chant death to America. That is not all of Iran. That is a minority religious sect that has been dominating political discourse in that country for 47 years. So, I think, again, before this conference starts, I think it's important people recognize this probably isn't going to look like Operation Iraqi Freedom. Not going to look like enduring freedom in Afghanistan. We're not seeing a bunch of Marine boots on the ground and infantry boots on the ground and tank units moving into position. What we are seeing is the eradication of this terrorist regime with the hope that the Iranian populace, the majority of which in my assessment, is not in accord with this worldview that the Ayatollah and his top-tier clerical and military leadership had been sharing. So, it's a really difficult time, Josh, but intelligence is going to drive the precision. It's going to drive the preservation of civilian life. And then, I think what we have to do is hope that a true coalition can form around a different vision for future governance of Iran that respects human rights.
And I know we're kind of jumping all over the place, but I wanted to ask you about the operation itself when we talk about, the fact that there weren't any leaks. Now, it's important to note that we knew that something was going to happen at some point. You heard a lot of speculation about, oh, this could happen in the next week. This could happen in 48 hours. But in reality, everyone kind of woke up and learned this had happened overnight here in the U.S. Obviously, it happened in Iran, so it was early in the day there. The sun was out. But wanted to ask you, the fact that there were no leaks, that nobody knew about this, word didn't get out, what do you think about that overall? Because that indicates that there was basically a situation put into place to make sure that that didn't happen.
Right. Yeah, no, and I think that, I hate to bring this up, but I think we recall the Houthi attacks and what happened with a signal thread with the National Security Council. And it appears to me, and this is just, as a former intelligence officer and special security officer observing this, hey, I think some lessons were learned. And I think the lessons were put into practice. And we've seen that now through 3 iterations. I mentioned Midnight Hammer, the initial bombing of a couple of nuclear sites by B-2s. I mentioned Absolute Resolve, kidnapping of Maduro with no significant U.S. casualties. change Venezuela's future strategically, moving forward. Now, this strike, very similarly, at a much, much larger order of magnitude, and in partnership in many ways with the Israelis. I think it speaks to some lessons learned that are being applied. And I do also assess that it creates some tension, right? That operational security and necessary military secrecy, right? Like, we're talking about secrecy that is justified because it is how we protect American lives. It is how we ensure that those strikes that were made against the Ayatollah and the senior-most Islamic Republic leadership, that those were effective. And so military secrecy is a justified secrecy, but you can see how it's playing out now in some tensions. And I think that we need to be mindful also. The gentlemen that will be speaking now are also responsible for ensuring the success of what is now a heavily engaged exchange of fires and retaliatory strikes, with Iran striking our allies in the region, with Iran threatening strikes here in the U.S. or terrorism kind of like a cancer metastasized into our society or European society. And so I think we're at a very tense moment. You can't understate that, Josh.
And it's, as we were talking, of course, you mentioned the potential for other situations. You have federal law enforcement working together, trying to check out any potential threat, make sure they're checking social media, other tips to potentially stop something that could happen. Sadly, about 24 hours ago, we had the situation over in Austin, Texas, where a gunman opened fire. And as we learned, the FBI, other investigators saying this appears, of course, to be connected because you have the suspect who was wearing a Property of Allah shirt and then an Iranian flag. So now federal law enforcement working to prevent anything like that from happening. Aside from that, I wanted to ask you kind of what goes into federal law enforcement all working together on the intelligence side to check and make sure that there isn't something being planned to foil anything that could happen beforehand.
So that's a great question. First off, I'm just going to make a quick public service announcement that, if you see something, say something, right? Be a responsible citizen and be a responsible American or, just a responsible human. If you see something that looks suspicious or you've seen something, the right answer is to call your local law enforcement. And then local law enforcement will share that with an entity called the National Counterterrorism Center. And there are regional counterterrorism task forces. And I say we, I'm not in the government, put a disclaimer on anything I say right now, but there are and have been regional domestic law enforcement, public safety, integrated information sharing units. So if people see something, they can say something. You can call local law enforcement. That then can put threads together, and people may remember 9/11. 9/11, 19 hijackers, and a 20th suspect. We didn't have this type of infrastructure at that time. And so I think one of the things I would urge is understand the proper mechanism is to see something, say something, report it to local law enforcement, call 911 if it looks like an emergency. But if information is not shared up from the public, oftentimes local law enforcement won't be in a position to write a report, a document that then flows up to these national counterterrorism coordinating bodies that can then push alerts out for safety. But I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. This is a very difficult. Counterterrorism is an incredibly difficult game because a single failure and it's catastrophic, right? All that a terrorist group or an individual lone actor has to do is slip one by the goalie, as it were. And so I think that that's kind of my top comment. And I do think there's reasonable circumstances here to have elevated concern about domestic terrorism. We are in the midst of a massive exchange of conventional military firepower with what has been the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism. And so I think it's really critical we listen to the words of the National Counterterrorism Center current director Joe Kent mentioned that there may be thousands of individuals that need to be that we have concern about, and the American people have a role in that by sharing suspicious activity.
All right, as you can see, the camera appears to be zooming over. Not quite clear if they're just getting the shot set up for when this starts. But, of course, we know that Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, as well as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, both very well known. We saw them several months ago after Operation Midnight Hammer, they came together and did a similar news conference. Of course, the second that we see them walk out, we're going to make sure to stop talking and put up the audio. But Andrew, I wanted to ask you here about the significance of even holding a news conference here to provide this update to America, to the nation. And as I say that,
here we go.
Here we go. All right, we're going to pop up the audio and listen in.
All right.
Thank you again, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. Oh, nope. That was the speech guy.
Yeah, that was a fake out. I was thinking.
Can I just tell you know what I want right now, Josh? I want a telestrator like John Madden in the 1990s, because I kind of want to circle that guy and I can walk the audience through what you just saw. Was probably, it looked like a Marine uniform, but you know, that's probably a lieutenant colonel or a colonel. He probably works for, you know, the secretary or the chairman, and he's just taken those notes, put them on the podium, and now he's back. Getting things ready for the next round, kind of like John Madden circling the O lineman. But this is how these things go. I don't mean to make light of a tense situation.
No, of course.
But the Pentagon has been in business a very long time, and I think we're observing also, some great Americans doing what they do.
Yeah, for